He is the most feared man in Seoul. One phone call from Kang Jun-ha can make a person disappear. One look from him can silence an entire room. He built his empire on blood, silence, and the kind of discipline that costs a man everything soft inside him. Nobody crosses him. Nobody reaches him. That is the rule. And the rule has never been broken. Until one frozen night, he finds a young black woman dying in the snow. A complete stranger. A nobody. And for reasons even he cannot explain, the most dangerous man in Seoul cannot walk away. If you've ever loved someone who was never supposed to be yours, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The snow had been falling since early evening, and by midnight it had swallowed the city whole. Seoul in winter carried a particular kind of silence, not peaceful, not still, but the silence of something holding its breath. The streets in the Mapo district were empty at this hour. The restaurants were shuttered. The convenience stores threw pale rectangles of light onto the sidewalk. A drunk man slept against a closed pharmacy door, one shoe missing, his breath rising in short white puffs above his face. No one stopped to check on him. No one stopped for anything at this hour. Kang Jun-ha walked with his hands inside his coat pockets, his pace unhurried in the way of a man who knows nothing around him poses a threat. He was 34 years old and had not felt afraid in a very long time. Fear was something that happened to other people. People who had not yet learned to remove everything from their life that could be used against them. He was 2 blocks from the car. His driver, Park Sung-il, would be idling at the corner of the intersection near the old overpass, the engine running, heat on full, the privacy partition raised. Sung-il had been his driver for 9 years and understood the value of not asking questions. Most of the people in Junha's orbit had learned that particular survival skill. The meeting tonight had gone longer than expected. A distribution arrangement with a partner organization from Busan had developed complications. The kind of complications that required Junha to be present in the room rather than communicating through intermediaries. He had resolved the matter with 20 minutes of conversation and a silence so complete at the end of it that the men from Busan had not spoken again until they were back in their vehicles. He hadn't raised his voice once. He never did. There was no need. He turned up the collar of his coat against the wind. The cut on his right knuckle from 3 weeks ago had nearly healed, leaving behind a thin line of pale scar tissue. He flexed the hand without thinking about it, the way a person unconsciously checks an old wound to confirm it no longer hurts. He was thinking about nothing in particular, about the Busan contract, about the call he would need to make to his financial operations director before Thursday, about the fact that his apartment had been too quiet lately, when he noticed something in the shadow beneath the pedestrian overpass. He almost kept walking. There was a shape at the base of the concrete support pillar that he had nearly categorized as a pile of discarded bags or someone's left-behind luggage. But then the shape shifted, barely, and his brain reclassified what his eyes were showing him: a person. Sitting against the pillar, knees drawn up, head dropped forward. Junha stopped. He stood in the snow and looked at the shape for a moment. His first thought, clear and practical: this is not your concern. His second thought arrived immediately after: someone is going to die in this cold if they stay on that ground. The temperature had dropped below -12 after sundown. The snow was still falling, unhurried and relentless, coating everything in white. The woman, and he could see now that it was a woman, slight, in a dark coat far too thin for this weather, had snow collecting on her shoulders and in the hood of her jacket, which meant she had not moved in some time. He crossed the sidewalk. Up close, the details assembled themselves quickly. Young woman, foreign, black, with natural hair pressed flat under the hood of her jacket. She was wearing a single thin layer over what appeared to be a work uniform of some kind. Dark trousers and a collared shirt visible at the collar of the jacket. No gloves, no scarf. A canvas bag had fallen over at her side, its contents partly spilling. A textbook, a battered wallet, a name badge attached to a lanyard. Her breathing was there, but shallow, each breath dragged in slowly. and her lips had taken on the kind of color that medical textbooks use to illustrate what hypothermia looks like in its middle stages. He crouched in front of her. Snow pressed through the knee of his trousers immediately. "Hey!" He kept his voice flat, not gentle. He had no particular talent for gentleness. "Wake up." She didn't respond. He reached out and gripped her shoulder and shook her, not hard but firmly. "I'm talking to you. Open your eyes." A long pause. Then something stirred behind her face. Her eyelids dragged open, heavy and slow, and she looked at him the way a person looks when they're not entirely sure what they're seeing is real, with one eye slightly more open than the other, with a confusion that was almost childlike in its helplessness. "I'm fine." Her voice came out cracked and wrong. She said it in English. I'm okay. Just resting." "You're not okay." He looked at her hands. They were shaking so badly he could see it even in the dark. "How long have you been sitting here?" She blinked. The question seemed to take longer to reach her than it should have. "I don't—" She tried to pull herself upright against the pillar and failed, her arms slipping against the concrete. "I missed the last bus. I was waiting." "For what?" "For—" She stopped, swallowed. "For it to stop being so cold." Junha looked at her for a moment with an expression that people who knew him would have recognized as him running calculations. Then he pulled out his phone and called Sung-il. "Pull around to the overpass on Mapo Daero. The North support. Come now." He ended the call before Sung-il could respond. The woman was watching him with eyes that were alert now but wary, in the way of someone who has learned to be careful of unexpected help. "Who are you calling?" "My driver." "I don't need—" She shifted, trying again to stand, and this time she got about 6 inches off the ground before her legs gave out entirely and she dropped back against the pillar. Her jaw tightened. She was humiliated. He could see it, the way shame ran across her face like a reflex, fast and involuntary. "Stop moving." He said it without inflection, not an order exactly, but a statement of fact about what was practical. He picked up the items that had fallen from her bag and pushed them back inside without looking at them, then zipped it closed. "I don't know you," she said. "No." "I'm not getting in a car with someone I don't know." He looked at her then, really looked at her. At the shaking in her hands she was clearly trying to control, at the blue tinge at the edges of her lower lip, at the way she was holding herself tightly because her body was trying to conserve whatever heat remained. "Your choice," he said, "but your core temperature is dropping and you're going to lose consciousness again in the next few minutes. You can either get in the car and get warm, or you can stay here and see what happens." She stared at him. There was something in her eyes, something that was not quite fear and not quite defiance, but some combination of the two that lived in the space between them. The look of someone who had been making hard calls for a long time and was very tired of it. The headlights of the black sedan came around the corner. She didn't say anything else. When he moved to help her stand, she didn't refuse, though he could feel the rigidity in her arm, the way she allowed the assistance without conceding to it, still holding some part of herself back. He got her into the back seat. He climbed in after her. Sung-il did not turn around. Junha said, "Dr. Wu, call ahead." Sung-il picked up his phone without a word. The woman was sitting as far against her door as the seat allowed, her wet canvas bag in her lap, her arms crossed over her chest. The car was warm and he could see the way the heat hit her, the slight shudder through her shoulders, the way she squeezed her eyes shut briefly, just once, before forcing them open again. She was fighting very hard to maintain some version of dignity. He found that he noticed this. He wasn't sure why. "Your name," he said. A beat. "Amara." "Amara what?" "Bell." She said it like she was deciding as she went whether to give it to him. "Amara Bell." He nodded once. "Kang Jun-ha." She didn't react to the name, which meant she was either new to Seoul or she existed in parts of the city where his name held no particular weight. He decided it was probably both. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "Private clinic. You need warming treatment. Your fingers may be frostbitten." "I can't." She stopped herself mid-sentence and he watched her reset, watched her push something down. "I don't have insurance in Korea. Not for—" It's complicated. I can't afford a private clinic. I didn't ask about your finances. I know you didn't. Her voice steadied, the cold in it now the cold of pride rather than temperature. I'm telling you. He said nothing. The car moved through the empty streets. She was staring ahead through the windshield at the falling snow, and her jaw was set in a way that he recognized as someone who had been told no so many times that they'd started saying it to themselves first, preemptively, to get ahead of the disappointment. He had not been told much about her life in the 20 minutes since he'd found her. He didn't need to be. He had learned to read people the way certain people learn to read weather, by looking at the evidence without sentiment and arriving at accurate conclusions. The worn edge of her bag, the doubled-up work lanyard suggesting more than one job, the textbook half visible through the zipper of her bag, dense with handwritten notes in the margins, the spine cracked from overuse. The fact that her jacket was not warm enough for Seoul in January by a significant margin, which suggested either very bad luck or a budget that left no room for error. She was a student, working multiple jobs, alone. And when her body had finally given out on a frozen sidewalk, there had been no one to call. The private medical facility that Junha used for situations requiring discretion was a 4-story building in a quiet area of Mapo that appeared from the street to be an ordinary specialist clinic. Dr. Wu was already waiting at the entrance when the car pulled up. A compact Korean woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular unflappable expression of someone who had been managing Junha's private medical arrangements for years and had stopped asking questions even earlier than Sung-il had. Amara resisted again at the door. Not in a way that was hysterical or dramatic, just in the way of someone quietly insisting on their own terms. I need to know what this cost, she said, before I go in. Dr. Wu looked at Junha. He gave a small nod that meant, take care of her. Don't worry about that tonight, Dr. Wu said, and something in her voice, practiced, matter-of-fact, moved Amara forward. She walked into the building. He did not go inside immediately. He stood in the cold for a moment in front of the entrance and looked at the snow falling on the empty street. He tried to identify what he was feeling and found he could not exactly name it. It was not sympathy. He had largely excised sympathy from his functional emotional range in his mid-20s, when he had recognized it as a liability. It was something older than sympathy and less comfortable, something closer to recognition. He went inside. She was in one of the treatment rooms for 2 hours. He sat in a chair in the corridor and answered messages on his phone and thought about the Busan contract. He told himself this was purely practical. He had brought an injured person to a clinic, a thing any responsible human would do, and now he was waiting to ensure the situation was resolved before returning to his evening. He told himself this several times in the space of those 2 hours, which was, if he had been paying attention to it, already a sign that something about the situation required more internal justification than it should. Dr. Wu emerged at 1:30 in the morning. Early-stage hypothermia, no serious frostbite, some minor tissue damage on the fingers of her left hand. She'll be fine. She needs heat and rest and food. A pause. She keeps asking about the bill. What did you tell her? That we'd discuss it when she's stable. Another pause. She's not going to let this go, you know. He didn't respond. She asked if I could tell her what kind of a person you are. Dr. Wu looked at him with the particular neutrality she had perfected over years of knowing exactly what kind of person he was and maintaining her professional distance from that knowledge. I told her you weren't dangerous to her. He glanced up from his phone. That was generous. I thought so. She turned back toward the treatment room. She's awake if you want to see her. He did not particularly want to see her, but he went in anyway. Amara Bell was sitting upright in the clinic bed, both hands wrapped in warm dressings, wearing a paper gown over her work uniform because the uniform itself had been too damp to keep on. Her hair was loose now, and the natural texture of it framed her face differently than it had under the hood of her jacket. She looked younger without the cold pressing down on her. She also looked, very clearly, like someone whose mind was running very fast behind careful eyes. She looked at him when he came in and did not look away. The doctor says you're going to be fine, he said. I know. Then, thank you for stopping. He acknowledged this with a slight movement of his head. What happens now? She asked. You rest. In the morning you can go. She nodded slowly. Then, with the steadiness of someone who has already had this argument with themselves and won, I need to know the cost of tonight. All of it. The clinic, the doctor, whatever this is. She looked around the room without apology. I'm going to pay it back. I don't know how long it takes, but I will. He studied her. The particular way she held herself, back straight, chin level, eyes direct, in a paper gown in a private clinic in the middle of the night, in a city that was not her own, with nothing to her name except a battered bag and more determination than most people he'd ever encountered in boardrooms or back rooms or anywhere else. We can discuss that when you're better, he said. We can discuss it now. No aggression in it, just refusal. I want to know what I owe. He told her a number, a partial number, far below the actual cost, but he named it with the delivery of a man stating a straightforward fact. She absorbed it without flinching, which told him she'd already run a version of this calculation in her own head on the way in. Okay, she said. I'll pay it. All of it. He nodded once and left. In the car on the way back to his apartment, Sung-il was quiet in the way he always was, which meant he would never ask the question, but had noticed something he was quietly cataloging. Junha looked out the window at the snow, which had not stopped. He thought about the look in her eyes when her legs had given out against the pillar and she'd felt the humiliation of it. The way she'd pulled herself back from the edge of that humiliation, using only the force of her own refusal to surrender to it. He hadn't seen that in a long time. That particular kind of dignity, the kind that doesn't need anything to stand on. He told himself this was the end of it. He had helped someone. Tomorrow she would leave the clinic and return to her life, and he would return to his, and the whole thing would reduce itself to a minor interruption in a long winter. He almost believed it. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing in that car, in that silence, with the snow burying Seoul under its weight, was that the woman now sleeping in his private clinic would walk out of it in 12 hours and directly into the fault line of his entire empire, pulling with her a thread that, once pulled, would unravel things he had spent 15 years constructing. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed by deciding to ignore them. He was about to learn what that meant. Amara left the clinic at 7:40 in the morning. She had been awake since 5, lying in the clinic bed with the ceiling above her and the particular alertness of someone whose body had rested but whose mind had never fully stopped running. The warmth of the room had brought the feeling back into her fingers, which now ached in a deep, specific way that she catalogued and set aside. She had dressed herself in her slightly damp work uniform, repacked her bag with the careful economy of someone who had learned to account for every item she owned, and was sitting upright waiting when the morning nurse came in at 6:30. She asked the nurse for a receipt. The nurse looked at her with mild surprise and said she would check. Nobody brought a receipt. Instead, a young assistant in a pressed suit came in at 7:15 and told her, in careful English, that Mr. Kang had arranged for a car to take her wherever she needed to go, and that there was no rush. Amara thanked him politely and said she would take the bus. She took the bus. It was 40 minutes across the city to the semi-basement apartment she shared with one other international student, a Vietnamese woman named Lin, who worked night shifts at a bakery and was almost never home when Amara was. The apartment smelled like instant noodles and damp concrete. The single window at ground level showed a rectangle of gray winter sky. Amara showered, changed into her second set of work clothes, ate half a container of leftover rice standing over the kitchen sink, and looked at the time. She had class in 2 hours and a shift at the cafe immediately after, and then a 4-hour cleaning shift at the office building downtown, starting at 9 in the evening. She had slept perhaps 5 hours total. Her left hand was bandaged from the wrist to the middle knuckle of each finger, which was going to make carrying trays difficult. She picked up her bag and went to class. She did not allow herself to think about the clinic, or the man, or what any of it meant until she was on the bus again, in the late afternoon, riding toward the cafe. Then she let herself think about it for exactly the length of time it took to ride 4 stops. And at the end of those 4 stops, she had concluded the following. A very dangerous man had helped her, and she had accepted that help because she had been in a situation where refusing it would have been fatal, and now she owed him a specific amount of money which she was going to repay, And that was the entire relationship in full. She had accepted help before from people who later wanted things for it. She knew exactly how that worked. She was not going to pretend that Kang Junha was operating outside the logic of that pattern just because he had not named his price yet. She got off at her stop and walked to the cafe. The cafe was called Blossom House. It was in an upmarket district of Mapo, a slender two-story space with exposed brick and minimal lighting that served expensive coffee and hand-cut sandwiches to a clientele that treated it like a living room. Amara had been working there for 4 months. The manager, a thin Korean man in his early 40s named Mr. O, tolerated her presence with the particular tolerance of someone doing a reluctant favor. He had hired her through an international placement program and had never let her forget that the hire had been more complicated than it needed to be. She tied on her apron and moved behind the counter, and the morning girl, Soyeon, gave her the handover with the particular speed of someone trying to get out the door. Table 7 has been waiting for pour-over for 20 minutes. The milk steamer is making the noise again, and Mr. O is in the back office, and he's been there all morning, so whatever you do, don't mess anything up today. Amara nodded and went to work. The afternoon shift passed in its ordinary way. Coffee orders, card transactions, a minor incident with a spilled oat milk latte that she cleaned up before Mr. O emerged from the back office. Her bandaged hand slowed her down in ways she tried not to show. The simple act of gripping the pitcher requiring a rerouting of pressure to compensate for what the damaged fingers couldn't hold. She adapted without making it visible. This was a skill she had acquired very early, in a context that had nothing to do with coffee shops. At 4:15, the door opened and 2 men in dark coats came in. They were not the kind of men who came to Blossom House. They were too large for the space, and they carried themselves with a stillness that was immediately recognizable as trained rather than natural. One of them sat down at the counter. The other remained near the door, not quite blocking it, his hands clasped in front of him. The one at the counter looked at Amara. He had a flat face and a small scar running through one eyebrow, and he looked at her the way a person looks at a thing that needs to be moved. "You're Amara Bell." She set down the cup she was rinsing. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Kang wants to see you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the man near the door. Then she looked back at the man at the counter. "I have a shift until 8, she said. "Mr. Kang's schedule doesn't work around cafe shifts." "Then Mr. Kang will have to wait." She picked up the cup and finished rinsing it and placed it on the drying rack. Her heart rate had gone up, but not dramatically. She had learned that the degree to which you visibly react to pressure is often directly proportional to the amount of additional pressure that results. The man at the counter looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him recalibrating. Had clearly been expecting something other than this. "I'm going to need you to come with us," he said, and there was now a different register in his voice, lower and more specific. "I heard you the first time." She looked directly at him. "I have a shift. I'll come after." Mr. O had appeared at the door of the back office. He was looking at the 2 men with an expression Amara had never seen on him before, which was a very particular kind of stillness, the kind that arrives when a person suddenly understands they are in the presence of something that outranks their authority by a significant margin. The man at the counter held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he took out his phone, made a brief call, said 2 sentences in Korean, and listened. He put the phone away. 8 o'clock, he said. "We'll be outside." He stood, and both men left. Mr. O stared at her from the doorway of his office. She waited for the question. "Do you know who those men work for?" he asked, finally, in Korean slow enough for her to follow. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long time and then went back into his office and did not speak to her again for the rest of the shift. The car was waiting at 8 o'clock, as stated. She got in the back, and the man with the scar through his eyebrow drove without speaking through 40 minutes of city traffic until they stopped in front of a building that appeared to be a private business office, high floor, all glass and steel, the kind of building whose lobby has art on the walls and no signage visible from the street. She was taken up in an elevator and walked through a corridor and through a set of double doors into a room that had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides showing the nighttime city, a desk she could have parked a car on, and Kang Junha standing with his back to the room, looking at the view. He turned when she came in. He was in a different suit from the night before, dark charcoal, and he looked like a man who had slept and worked and moved through an entire day with perfect functionality, which only made the one thing slightly out of place more visible: the quality of his attention when he looked at her, like a mechanism that has registered an anomaly and is trying to determine its nature. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand," she said. A pause. The man who had driven her left the room and pulled the door shut. "You took the bus this morning," Junha said. "I take the bus every morning." "There was a car available for you." "I know." She kept her bag strap on her shoulder, both hands in front of her. The bandaged hand was throbbing from the shift. "I didn't need it." He studied her. "You wanted to establish something." "I wanted to take the bus." He moved from the window to the desk, not sitting behind it, but stopping at the edge of it, arms crossed. "I want to talk about the debt." "So do I." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a handwritten schedule. She had done it on her lunch break, columns and figures written in a small, dense hand. She crossed the room and placed it on the desk in front of him. "That's what I can pay monthly. The amount you gave me at the clinic, I can clear it in 8 months, maybe 7 if my tutoring picks up in spring." He looked at the paper without touching it. Then he looked at her. "That's not the number." "What?" "The number I gave you last night. It wasn't the full cost." The room went very quiet. She held very still. "The actual cost," he said, and named a figure. She absorbed it. She didn't look away from him. The number was not something her handwritten schedule addressed. It was not something any schedule she could build in the next several years would address. She watched his face while she processed this and found nothing there that was apologetic or uncomfortable, which told her this was not being delivered with regret. It was a statement of fact. "You lied to me," she said. "I gave you a number that wouldn't panic you before you'd recovered." "That's the same thing." He didn't dispute this. "Yes," she breathed, once slowly, through her nose. "Then I need to know the real arrangement. What do you actually want?" "I want the debt repaid." "In what form?" He picked up her handwritten schedule from the desk and looked at it properly for the first time. His expression did not change, but he read it carefully, she could tell, the way his eyes moved down the columns. "I have a legitimate business, a hospitality management group. One of the properties is a hotel in Mapo. They need front-of-house staff." He set the paper down. "The salary would allow you to clear the debt in 18 months and still cover your living expenses." She stared at him. "You want me to work for you?" "You said you'd pay it back. I'm giving you a way to do that." "In your hotel?" "In a hotel that I own, yes. It operates legally. You would be an employee with a contract." She searched his face for the part that was not being said. There was always a part that was not being said. "And what else?" "Nothing else. Powerful men don't do favors without a reason." "This isn't a favor," he said. "This is a transaction. You owe a debt. I'm providing a means of repayment. The transaction ends when the debt is cleared." She looked at him for a long time. The city was visible behind him through the glass, Seoul at night in all its cold luminosity, and he stood in front of it like he was native to it in a way most people could never be. Like the city was something he had built rather than something he simply lived inside. "I have class," she said. "Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings, those don't move." "Noted." "And I need the contract in writing before I start." "Of course. And if at any point I decide this arrangement isn't working, I leave. I'll find another way to repay the remaining balance." Something shifted in his expression, so small it was barely there, the suggestion of something at the very back of his eyes. Not offense. Something more like the specific attention of a man encountering a thing he had not been expecting to encounter. "Agreed," he said. She picked up her handwritten schedule from the desk, folded it, put it back in her bag. It was a proprietary document. She didn't leave things behind in places she didn't control. "I'll start Monday," she said. She left. He stood in the room after she left and looked at the city and did not immediately pick up the phone or return to the work that had been waiting on his desk. He stood there for perhaps a minute and a half, which was, by the standards of his typical operating rhythm, a very long time to do nothing. The hotel was called the Mercer Mapo. It was a boutique property, 36 rooms, a rooftop bar, a ground-floor restaurant that served a brunch menu on weekends, and a prefix dinner menu during the week. The staff knew who owned it. They also knew that the owner's direct involvement with day-to-day operations was essentially non-existent, which was why the mood in the ground floor break room on the morning of Amara's first shift was less concerned with her employer and more concerned with her. There were 8 full-time front-of-house staff at the Mercer Mapo. Their collective response to Amara's arrival could be summarized as suspicious. This was not entirely about race, though race was part of it. She was the only black employee the hotel had ever had, and there were looks exchanged in the break room that did not need translation. It was also about the nature of how she'd arrived. Nobody had been involved in the hiring process. No interview, no manager review, no standard onboarding procedure. She had simply appeared on the Monday morning schedule, placed there by an instruction from above with no accompanying explanation, and in an environment where everything that arrived without explanation from above carried a specific implication. The staff had drawn their own conclusions. The conclusion they drew was that she was associated with John Ha in a way that had nothing to do with hospitality management. The floor manager was a woman named Cha Yun-jung, mid-30s, with the particular efficiency of someone who ran a tight operation and intended to keep running it. She walked Amara through the property on the first morning with the professional warmth of a person completing a required task, showed her the front desk protocols and the reservation system and the storage room where the extra linens were kept, and answered her questions with clipped precision. On the third day, Eun-jung pulled her aside near the elevator bank. "The others are watching you," she said, in careful English, which Amara appreciated. "They think you are here for reasons that are not about the work." "I know what they think," Amara said. "I want you to understand," Eun-jung said, and she was looking at her with something that was not unfriendly but was entirely direct. "That what happens in this hotel is my responsibility. If you are here for other reasons, I'm here to work." Amara met her eyes steadily. "That's the only thing I'm here for." Eun-jung held her gaze for a moment and then gave a short nod, the kind that doesn't commit to belief but commits to observation. "Then work," she said, and turned back toward the desk. Amara worked. She was better than they expected. This was not arrogance on her part. It was simply the math of what happens when a person with 3 jobs worth of hospitality experience, a hotel management minor, and the specific competence that comes from having no margin for error applies themselves to a single property. She memorized the reservation system in 2 days. She learned the names of the regular guests by the end of the first week. She handled a complicated situation involving a double-booked suite and an irate client with a calm that left the irate client thanking her as he left. The whispers didn't stop, but their register changed. She was also, in the time she was not at the hotel, still a student and still exhausted. She attended her Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning lectures with the particular presence of someone very tired who has not yet given themselves permission to let that show. She ate cheap food. She studied in the hotel break room on her lunch breaks. She mapped her subway transfers to minimize time and maximize warmth. She slept an average of 5.5 hours. The debt was real, and she intended to eliminate it. What she did not intend was to encounter Junha at the hotel. He appeared on the Thursday of her second week without warning, arriving in the mid-afternoon with 2 associates and taking a meeting in the private dining room. She knew he was there before she saw him. Could tell by the particular shift in the atmosphere of the lobby, the way the staff straightened infinitesimally, the way the conversation in the back office dropped in volume. She was behind the front desk when he crossed the lobby. He paused. She looked up. A moment passed that was the length of a breath and contained the weight of something longer. He gave the same slight nod he had given in his office. She returned it. He continued toward the private dining room. One of the desk staff, a young man named Jiho, who was simultaneously the most talkative and least discreet person on the floor, leaned toward her the moment the dining room door closed. "He never comes here," he said in English, because Jiho always spoke to her in English and had appointed himself her unofficial sole cultural guide, despite knowing nothing about her beyond her name. In 2 years, he came maybe 3 times, always for meetings, never in the afternoon. Amara kept her eyes on her screen. "He owns the hotel, Jiho." "I know that." Jiho looked at the dining room door. "I'm just saying, it's not normal." "Then I'm sure there's a reason." "Do you know what the reason is?" I'm looking at a screen right now. He looked at her profile for a moment with an expression she could feel without seeing. Then, the other staff think you're his girlfriend. The other staff can think whatever they want. I told them that was probably not it. He paused. Was I wrong? She looked up from the screen then, directly at him, with the specific look she had developed over years of being underestimated in environments where she had no margin for error. Not hostile, not warm, simply the look of a person declining to justify themselves. Jiho absorbed it and went back to his own screen. Junha left after 90 minutes. He did not stop at the front desk again, but as he passed through the lobby, he was close enough that she could see the tiredness around his eyes that was invisible to anyone who hadn't been looking for it. The kind that sits too deep for a night's sleep to touch. And for one unguarded second, something in her face moved in response to that before she shut it down completely. She did not examine that response until much later. The confrontation happened in the third week. It was not dramatic. It was in some ways worse for not being dramatic. It was quiet and personal, and it found the specific crack that Amara spent most of her energy defending. Her name was Han Seul-ah. She was one of the senior front-of-house staff, early 30s, with the quiet authority of tenure and the particular composure of someone who had earned their position through patience and politics and intended to protect it. She had not been overtly hostile. She had been, from the beginning, simply cold in the specific way that is deniable because it never names itself. On a Wednesday afternoon, during a brief overlap in the break room, Seul-ah made a comment in Korean to a colleague, just loudly enough, just clearly enough, that Amara's Korean language skills were insufficient for her to catch more than fragments of, but whose tone was entirely legible. The colleague, a young woman named Hieri, who had, up until now, been the most neutral presence on the floor, laughed. A short laugh, involuntary, quickly covered. Amara stood at the break room counter and poured herself a cup of water and said nothing. Seul-ah looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the break room television with the specific composure of someone who has said what they wanted to say and is waiting to see if it lands. It landed. Amara felt it land. She felt the particular quality of humiliation that comes not from what is said, but from the performance of it, the audience, the casual cruelty of the ordinary workplace, which is somehow worse than something overt because it requires you to pretend you did not understand what just happened. She finished her water. She rinsed the cup. She went back to the front desk. She got through the rest of the shift. She got through the commute. She got through the semi-basement apartment and the rectangle of night sky through the ground-level window. She sat on the edge of her bed and allowed herself exactly the amount of feeling she could afford, which was a specific and practiced measurement, and then she stopped. She did not tell Junha. She did not intend to tell Junha. What happened instead was that Junha found out anyway, through the particular information network of someone who maintains precise awareness of what occurs within his operations, and he arrived at the hotel the following afternoon. What he did next was something the staff of the Mercer Mapo would not stop talking about for the rest of the month. He called a floor meeting, not through the manager, directly. 12 minutes after arriving, every front-of-house staff member was standing in the lobby and Junha was in front of them, and the temperature in the room was the temperature of a place where a very controlled person is working very hard at remaining controlled. He spoke in Korean. His voice did not rise. It remained exactly where it always was, low, even, entirely without the need for volume to establish its weight. He said, in the particular language of a man who measures every word he uses, that the staff of this property were there to do a job, and the job required a standard of conduct that had not been maintained, and that the next time conduct failed to meet that standard, the consequence would be immediate and non-negotiable. He looked at Seul-ah at the end of this. Not for long, just long enough. Seul-ah did not look away, but her jaw was tight. Then he looked at Amara, and whatever he found in her face in that moment, the rigid self-containment of it, the deliberate stillness of someone who had not asked for this and was not sure what to do with it, something shifted in his expression, small, barely perceptible, the way something changes behind glass when there is movement on the other side. He left. The lobby was silent for 10 full seconds. Then Eunjung said, quietly and firmly, that everyone should return to their stations, and the staff dispersed with the careful speed of people navigating a space that had just been rearranged. Jiho appeared at Amara's elbow at the desk. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "He's never done that before." She kept her eyes on the screen. "He's never done anything like that before," Jiho said, and the weight in his voice was not gossip anymore. It was something more careful. "Not for anyone." She didn't respond because she did not have a response that was honest and safe at the same time, and she had made it a rule not to say things that were neither. That evening, after her shift, she was standing at the service exit waiting for the cold to convince her to move toward the bus stop when her phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number. She knew whose it was. The message read, "You should have told me." She stared at it for a long time. Her breath came out in a white cloud in the cold air. The city made its sounds around her: traffic, someone's radio, the distant percussion of a construction site working late. She typed back, "It wasn't yours to handle." 3 minutes passed. Then, "It is now." She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the cold for another full minute and looked at nothing in particular and felt, in the deep center of her chest, the specific terror of a person who has just realized that a door they had every intention of keeping closed has been opened from the other side, and that the person who opened it has no idea, not yet, what is standing on her side of it waiting to come through. She didn't sleep that night. Not in the way of someone kept awake by noise or discomfort, but in the deliberate, eyes-open way of someone who has decided that sleep requires a surrender of vigilance they cannot currently afford. She lay on her narrow mattress in the semi-basement apartment and stared at the ceiling and listened to the city above her. The muffled percussion of foot traffic, the occasional car, the particular silence of 3 in the morning that is not silence at all, but the accumulated sound of a city running on its lowest frequency. And she thought about the message. It is now. 2 words. The compression of them. The way they closed off an argument she hadn't finished making. She thought about what it meant for something to belong to a person like Kang Jun-ha. She had spent enough weeks inside the orbit of his operation to understand that his ownership of things was not casual. It was absolute, and it was considered, and once it was established, it did not reverse. The hotel was his. The staff was his. The operation ran because he had built it to run, and because the people inside it understood the cost of failing to maintain what he had built. She had not wanted to be one of his things. She had been very careful about that. She had structured the entire arrangement, the debt, the repayment schedule, the contract, to ensure that what existed between them was a transaction with a defined endpoint. Transactions ended. Ownership didn't. It is now. She turned onto her side and looked at the ground-level window. The rectangle of sky had gone from black to the particular gray-purple of Seoul before dawn, the color of something that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. She thought, you need to be careful. And then, underneath that, quieter and less controlled. You are already not being careful. She got up at 5:30 and made coffee and studied for 90 minutes, and went to her morning lecture and sat in the 3rd row and took notes with the focused efficiency of someone spending cognitive resources they do not entirely have. The professor was covering contract law in international business contexts. She wrote down everything he said. She would not remember writing most of it. After the lecture, she sat in the corridor outside the classroom with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up and her notebook open, and she did not look at her phone for 22 minutes. Then she looked at her phone. No new messages from the unsaved number. She put the phone away and went to work. The atmosphere at the Mercer Mapo had changed in the aftermath of the floor meeting with the specific irreversibility of a room that has been rearranged. You could not pretend the furniture was still in its original position when you could see with your own eyes that it was not. Sola had called in sick the day after and had not yet returned. The remaining staff moved around Amara with a careful neutrality that was neither warmth nor hostility. A recalibration, a wait and see. Jiho continued to talk to her because Jiho's relationship with self-preservation instincts was, at best, theoretical. Eunjung watched her with the precise attention of a woman recalculating something. On the 2nd day after the floor meeting, Eunjung stopped her near the elevator bank again. Same location, same directness. He's never intervened in personnel matters, she said without preamble. In 2 years. Not once. Amara waited. I'm not asking you to explain it, Eunjung said. I'm telling you because you should know what it means to the people who work here, what they're reading into it. What are they reading into it? That you have protection. Eunjung's voice was neutral, reporting rather than judging. The kind that changes what you are in this place, whether you want it to or not. Amara held her gaze. I didn't ask for it. I know that. A pause. That doesn't change what it is. She went back to the desk. She handled the afternoon check-ins with her full attention, because full attention was the only standard she permitted herself. A family from Japan with 2 young children who had lost their booking confirmation, a solo business traveler who needed a room change due to street noise, a question about the rooftop bar hours that required 3 transfers before she located the correct answer. She was good at this work. She had always been good at work. It was the one area where the math was reliable. Effort in, result out, no variables she couldn't account for. It was after 7 when she finished her shift and came down the service stairs and pushed through the exit door into the cold of the back alley. And the black car was parked at the alley's mouth, and the man with the scar through his eyebrow was leaning against the hood, with his arms crossed and his breath coming in white clouds. And Amara stopped in the doorway and thought, of course. She walked to the car. He wants to see me. Yes. She got in. He was not at the glass and steel office building this time. The car took her further north, up through the Han River district, to a residential address. A building that appeared from the street to be an upmarket apartment tower, the kind with no signage and a doorman and lobby art that cost more than her annual tuition. She was taken up to the 14th floor. The apartment was large and almost completely spare. Not minimal in the architectural sense. The furniture was expensive, the materials were right. There was clearly someone who had made deliberate choices about the space. But it was spare in the way of a place that is lived in by one person who requires very little from their environment except that it function correctly. No photographs, no disorder. Books on a single shelf arranged with the evenness of objects that are rarely touched. The kitchen showed no evidence of cooking. The windows were floor to ceiling and showed the river and the bridge and the city beyond in the specific clarity of a cold, clear night. Junha was at a low table near the windows with papers in front of him and a glass of something he wasn't drinking. He looked up when she came in. The man with the scar left without being told to. She didn't sit. This isn't the office. No. Why here? He set down his pen. Because what I need to tell you isn't an office conversation. Something shifted in her chest. The small warning system she had built over years of navigating situations where the information she was about to receive was going to require a response she hadn't prepared. She kept her face still. Tell me. He stood, moved away from the table to the windows and stood looking at the river for a moment with his hands in his pockets and the particular quality of stillness she had come to recognize as a man choosing his words with surgical precision because the wrong ones would cost something he couldn't afford to lose. Someone ran a report on you, he said. 3 weeks ago, shortly after you started at the hotel. Background check, financial records, student visa documentation, academic enrollment. He turned from the window. I didn't order it. The air in the room was very still. Who did? My father. He said it flatly, without cushioning. Kang Min-seok. He has visibility into all properties connected to the organization. When an irregular hire appears, someone placed directly without the standard process, he gets notified. He had you investigated. She held herself very still. And he found what's in your file, which is... He stopped. Something moved through his face, tightly controlled, and then was gone. Your visa status. You're on a student visa with a restricted work permit. The number of hours you're legally allowed to work per week in Korea is limited. The hours you've actually been working, across all your jobs, exceed that limit significantly. The room tilted, not physically, but the thing she had been standing on, the solid ground of her own careful management of her own circumstances, shifted underneath her feet in a way she felt from her sternum down. That's a visa violation, she said. Her voice came out level. She was very focused on keeping it level. Yes. If it's reported, you lose your student status. You're deported. He said it without flinching because flinching would not help either of them. My father has documented everything. He's holding it. She looked at him. The cold precision of what had just been laid in front of her assembled itself in her mind with terrible clarity. 3 months of work, the debt repayment plan, her degree, 2 semesters from completion, the apartment, the life she had built in this city from nothing, holding it together with both hands through every cold morning and double shift and skipped meal. All of it suddenly sitting on a fault line she had not seen coming because she had been so careful. She had been so relentlessly careful, and it had not mattered. "What does he want?" she said. Junha's jaw was tight. "He wants you gone. He wants you to leave Korea voluntarily. No formal report, no deportation record. You simply leave and the file disappears." "And if I don't leave?" "Then he submits the documentation to immigration." She breathed, in through her nose, out slowly, the disciplined breath of someone managing the biological response to catastrophic information. Her hands were very still at her sides. She was not going to let them shake in front of him. "When?" she said. He gave a deadline. 2 weeks. Silence. The city through the glass was indifferent and brilliant and continuous. "Why are you telling me this?" she said, and the question was real, not rhetorical. "You could have let him handle it. I would have gotten the notification from immigration, and I would have had to go, and the debt would have been—" She stopped, breathed again. "It would have been resolved, from your perspective." "From my perspective." He repeated the phrase with a flatness that wasn't quite anger, but was the thing that exists just before anger, the compressed space where a person is deciding what they're going to do with what they feel. "You think that's my perspective?" "I don't know what your perspective is. I don't know you. You've been inside my operation for 3 weeks. That's not the same thing." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm telling you because it isn't right," he said, "and because I'm the reason you're in this position." A beat. "If you hadn't come to work at the hotel, his surveillance wouldn't have flagged you. You would have been invisible." She held very still. The precision of that, the chain of causation that led from a frozen sidewalk to a private clinic to a hotel job to a file sitting on his father's desk, assembled itself in her mind with the horrible clarity of something that cannot be reassembled differently, no matter how many times you look at it. "So your solution," she said, "I'm working on one." "That's not a solution, that's a delay." "Amara, 2 weeks." Her voice was still level, but there was something underneath it now, something that had been compressed too long and was pushing against the walls of her control. "I have 2 weeks before your father ends my entire life here. My degree, my visa, everything I've—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I came here because I had a plan. I have been executing that plan through everything this city has thrown at me for 2.5 years, and I was almost through it. I was almost done." The last 2 words came out with a weight she hadn't intended to let show, and she felt the exposure of it like a physical thing. "And now I'm standing in your apartment being told that a man I've never met has the power to take all of it away because he doesn't like that you hired me." He didn't say anything. He held her gaze, and he did not offer the soft reframing or the reassurance or any of the things a person offers when they want to reduce the size of what they've caused. He let it be the size it was. That, somehow, was the hardest thing. "I need to think," she said. "Take the night. I need more than a night. The timeline isn't mine." She picked up her bag. She moved toward the door and then stopped, because there was something she needed to know, and she was not going to leave without knowing it. "Your father," she said without turning around. "Have you talked to him?" "Yes." "And?" A long pause. "He won't move." She turned then and looked at him across the spare, clean apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows and the city beyond and the low table with its papers and its untouched glass, and the man standing in the middle of his own life looking at her with the expression of someone who has run the options and arrived at a place he did not plan to be. "You could make him move," she said. "You run the organization. He's your father, but you have the authority. You could shut it down. If I override him on this, it starts a war inside the family structure that I have spent 15 years carefully maintaining." His voice was even. "People will be affected, not just him and me. Then you're choosing the organization over—" She stopped herself. Over what? He said quietly. She looked at him. The word she had stopped on sat between them, unspoken, and she could see in his face that he heard it anyway, the word she had not said, and that hearing it had done something to him that showed only in the slight tension at the hinge of his jaw and the quality of his breathing, which had changed. I'll figure it out, she said. I'll find another way. She left. She took the bus home because the bus was what she had, and because the 40 minutes of cold transit gave her something to do with her body, while her mind ran the problem from every angle, searching for the approach she had not yet tried, the variable she had missed, the exit she had not yet identified. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Finding the angle, finding the way through. By the time she reached her stop, she had found nothing. She climbed the steps from the semi-basement apartment building's entrance and pushed through the door, and the hallway light flickered the way it always did, and she walked to her door and unlocked it and stepped inside and turned on the light. There was an envelope on the floor just inside the door. It had been slid under. Official-looking, with a government department heading visible through the clear address window. She picked it up and turned it over. Her name on the front. Her address. She stood in her coat in her small apartment and she looked at it for a long time. She opened it. It was not from immigration. It was from her university, the International Student Affairs Office, a department she had never had reason to contact. The letter informed her that a formal inquiry had been initiated regarding her enrollment status and eligibility for continued study, based on information received from an external party, and that she was required to attend a meeting with the International Student Compliance Officer within 5 business days. An external party. She sat down on the edge of her bed, still in her coat, and held the letter in both hands and read it twice more. The specific language of bureaucracy, so careful and so bloodless, describing the dismantling of everything she had built. The inquiry had already started. Kang Min-seok had not waited 2 weeks. He had moved immediately. Not through immigration directly, but through the university, which would trigger the same result through a longer and, from his perspective, cleaner route. She would be found in violation of her study permit terms. Her enrollment would be suspended, her student visa would become invalid, and the formal deportation process would follow as a matter of procedure. 2 weeks had been a fiction, a courtesy, or a test. She sat on the bed for a long time. Outside, the city made its sounds. Someone in the apartment above was watching television, the muffled audio of a late-night program bleeding through the ceiling. A car passed on the street at ground level, its headlights sweeping briefly across the rectangle of the window. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. She looked at the letter in her hands, and she thought about every decision that had led her to this room, this bed, this moment. She thought about her mother, 3,000 miles away, who had sacrificed the specific small things a person sacrifices over decades to put a daughter on a plane to Seoul with a scholarship and a plan. She thought about the scholarship, which covered tuition but not living costs, and the living costs, which had required 3 jobs, and the 3 jobs which had violated the terms of her visa, and the visa violation, which was now being used as a lever by a man she had never met to remove her from the only future she could see. And then she stopped. She put the letter down on the mattress next to her. She took off her coat and folded it. She put her bag on the chair. She stood in the middle of her apartment for 30 seconds and felt all of it. The weight and the terror and the exhaustion and the specific rage of someone who has worked without stopping and without complaining and without asking for more than what they earned, and who has been ambushed anyway. And then she let herself feel all of it for exactly as long as she could afford. Then she picked up her phone. She called the unsaved number. He picked up on the second ring. "He already moved," she said. "He went through the university. There's a letter." A silence on the other end that had its own texture, not empty, but dense. The silence of a man in whom something has just shifted at a level below language. "I need you to listen to me," she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the careful management she had been maintaining for weeks, stripped of the deliberate distance, stripped of everything except what was underneath it, which was not defeat. It had never been defeat. "I'm not leaving. I did not come this far to be removed by someone who has never once had to fight for anything he has. If you want to help me, then help me. But I need you to decide right now whether you're in this or not, because I am done standing in the middle and I am done waiting for you to choose, and if you are not going to move, then I will find another way to fight this by myself." The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. Then Junha said, very quietly, with the specific quality of a man who has just made a decision that will cost him everything he has spent 15 years protecting, "I'm going to call my father." She gripped the phone. "Tonight," he said. And the thing she had felt building for weeks, the thing she had refused to name, refused to acknowledge, refused to examine in any of the quiet moments when it had pressed against the inside of her chest, asking to be let through, broke the surface, not as warmth or relief, but as something far more dangerous, the specific terror of a person who has just realized that someone else has chosen to walk into the fire with them, and that now there is no protecting either of them from what comes next. He called his father at 11:17 in the evening. Amara heard nothing of the conversation. She was in her apartment with the letter on the mattress beside her and her phone face down on her knee, and she sat in the specific stillness of someone waiting for the outcome of something they cannot control, which was a position she was not accustomed to and did not tolerate with any particular grace. She sat with it anyway. There was nothing else to do. She did not hear from him that night. She did not sleep. She lay on her back with the ceiling above her and ran every scenario she could construct: legal, logistical, financial, procedural. And at the end of each one, she arrived at the same wall, which was that the power in this situation was not hers and could not be made hers through effort alone. And that was the specific kind of problem she had never fully learned to solve, because in her experience, effort was the mechanism, and now the mechanism was broken. At 6 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A message from the unsaved number. "My father wants to meet. Today. 3 o'clock. I need you to be there." She stared at the message for a long time. She typed back, "Why?" The response came in under a minute. "Because he asked to see you directly, and because I think you should let him." Another minute passed. Then she typed, "Where?" He sent an address. She got up and showered and dressed in the best clothes she owned, which was a dark blazer she had bought secondhand 18 months ago for a scholarship interview and had kept carefully pressed on a single hanger on the back of her closet door for situations that required her to look like someone whose circumstances did not define her. She put it on. She looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror for a moment, not with vanity, but with the specific assessment of someone checking their armor before entering territory they do not control. She looked like herself. She would have to be enough. The address was a private residence in Seongbuk-dong, in the hills north of the city center, where Seoul's oldest wealth had built itself behind walls and trees and the particular insulation of altitude. The houses up here did not announce themselves. They sat back from narrow roads behind gates and stone walls, visible only as roof lines above the tree line, suggesting size without displaying it. Junha's car was already outside when she arrived. He was waiting at the gate. He looked like he had not slept either, though on him it showed differently, not in disarray but in the quality of his stillness, which was the stillness of a man who had spent the night running the problem, and had arrived at a position and was now holding it with everything he had. He looked at her when she got out of the taxi. His eyes moved from her face to the blazer and back. He didn't say anything about any of it. "How did it go?" she said. "Last night." He listened. A beat. He didn't agree, but he listened. "That's not reassuring." "I know." He held the gate. "He's going to be direct with you. He doesn't do anything else." "Good," she said. "Neither do I." The house was traditional in its bones. A Korean hanok expanded and modernized in ways that preserved the structural logic of the original without sentimentalizing it. Wide wooden floors, low furniture, doors that opened onto a walled garden where the winter bare trees stood in perfect lines, their branches black against the white sky. It smelled like cedar and something else, older, the smell of a place that has been occupied for a very long time. Kang Min-seok was in the main room. He was 71 years old and built like a man who had once been physically formidable and had not entirely released that quality, even as age had restructured him. He was seated, but not in the way of someone who needed to be. His hair was white and cut short, and his face had the topography of a life lived at significant pressure, not crumpled by it, but shaped, the way stone is shaped by sustained force. His eyes, when he looked at Amara, were the same dark precision as his son's, and they did the same thing his son's eyes did, which was to arrive at an assessment before a word had been spoken. He gestured to a seat across from him without greeting her. She sat. Junha sat beside her, not behind her. She noted this. She thought he probably intended her to. Min-seok looked at her for a long moment. Then he said in English that was accented but clear and grammatically exact, the English of a man who had learned the language as a tool rather than a courtesy. "You are not what I expected." "I don't know what you expected," she said. "Someone softer." He said it as an observation, not a compliment. "Someone who would be frightened by the letter." "I was frightened by the letter." "But you're here." "I'm here." He looked at her steadily. "My son tells me you didn't ask him for help, that you were going to find another way." "I was." "What way?" "I hadn't determined that yet." Something moved through Min-seok's face, not warmth, but a very slight shift in the quality of his assessment, the recalibration of a man who has encountered a variable he had not weighted correctly. "You have been in Korea for 2.5 years, he said. "You came from the United States. With a scholarship." "Yes." "And the scholarship did not cover your living expenses." "No." "So you worked more than your visa permitted." He said it without accusation, as a man states the contents of a file he has already reviewed. "And you understood the risk." "I understood the risk." She held his gaze. "I made a calculation. My choices were to go home without finishing my degree or to work more hours than my visa technically allowed and finish. I chose to finish." He was quiet for a moment. "You understand why I investigated you. You thought I was a problem for your son. You are a problem for my son." No softening in it. "Whether you intend to be or not, my son's position requires a particular kind of stability. Personal attachments of this nature." He stopped himself, looked at Junha briefly, back to her. "They create exposure. They create leverage. There are people who would use you against him without hesitation." "I know that," she said. "Then you understand why I moved to remove the problem." "I understand why you thought it would work." She kept her voice level, kept her hands still on her knees, kept her eyes on his. "But I'm not a problem you can file away. I'm a person who has spent 2.5 years building something, and I'm not going to walk away from it because it became inconvenient for someone else's power structure." The room was very quiet. Junha was not moving beside her. She could feel the quality of his stillness. Coiled, waiting. The stillness of someone holding themselves back from intervening because they have decided that she needs to be the one to do this. Min-seok looked at her for a long time. "You have spirit," he said, and again it was not a compliment, it was a notation. "That is not always useful. It's gotten me this far. It's gotten you to a room where an old man can end your future with a phone call." "Then why haven't you made it?" she said. The silence after that was absolute. Min-seok's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Something very deep and very slow, the movement of a large thing deciding its direction. He looked at his son. Junha met his father's eyes and did not look away. It was the longest look Amara had ever witnessed between two people who were not speaking. It contained, she thought, 15 years of agreement and silence, and the accumulated weight of everything that had never been said in the space between them. And it contained something new, something she was watching arrive in real time. His son refusing, for the first time, to concede. Min-seok looked back at her. He said, "Come back tomorrow. I will have a decision." She stood. She nodded once. She did not thank him. In the car going back down the hill, neither of them spoke for several minutes. The city spread out below them in its winter clarity, gray and silver and white, the Han River cutting through it like a brushstroke. "You did well," Junha said. "I don't know what I did." "You didn't flinch." A pause. "Nobody talks to him like that." "Like what?" "Like he's a person who might be wrong." She looked out the window. The car descended through the tree-lined roads of Seongbuk-dong toward the noise and movement of the city below. "Is he going to move?" Junha was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said, and it was the most honest thing she had heard him say, stripped of the careful management he usually maintained around statements of uncertainty. "I genuinely don't know." She nodded. She kept looking out the window. Amara. He said her name the way he always said it, without the careful linguistic performance some people applied to names from other places. Just her name, direct and clear. She turned. He was looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had been trying not to respond to for weeks, the kind that does not announce itself but is present in every room like a change in air pressure. Whatever he decides tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm not standing by it. If he moves forward, I'll fight it through every channel I have. She held his gaze. That will start the war you told me about, inside the family structure. Yes. The one that affects people beyond just you and him. Yes, she breathed. Then I don't want you to do it on my behalf. His jaw tightened. It's not only on your behalf. Junha, it's also on mine. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something that had been compressed for a very long time and was pushing now against the surface. I have run this organization by my father's rules since I was 19 years old. Every decision I've made that conflicted with what I wanted, I set it aside because the structure mattered more. Because the people inside it depended on the structure. I told myself that was discipline. A pause. I'm starting to think it was something else. She looked at him. The city descended below them, pulling toward its ordinary noise and chaos and cold, and the car moved through it with the insulation of tinted glass and steel, and in the insulation of it he looked, for the first time in all the weeks she had known him, like a man who was not entirely in control of what his face was doing. She did not say anything, but she did not look away. The next day arrived with the particular brutal indifference of winter mornings that do not adjust themselves to the weight of what is happening inside them. Amara attended her compliance meeting at the university at 9 in the morning. The International Student Compliance Officer was a careful man named Mr. Park, who delivered the procedural requirements of the inquiry in the neutral language of institutional process. She listened and took notes and asked the right questions and gave nothing that was not required. When she left the building, the air hit her like a cold hand, and she stood on the steps for a moment and breathed. She had until the end of the week before the inquiry produced its preliminary findings. She went to work. The afternoon shift passed. At 4 o'clock her phone buzzed. From Junha. My father wants to meet again. His house. Now. She looked at the message. She looked at the time. She looked at the front desk in front of her, the reservation screen, the carefully maintained order of the afternoon. She typed, I have 2 hours left in my shift. His response, I'll clear it with Eun-jung. She put the phone in her pocket and looked up and found Eun-jung already crossing the lobby toward her, and the look on Eun-jung's face was the look of someone who has received instructions she is not going to question. Go, Eun-jung said simply. She went. The house in Seongbuk-dong was different this time. She felt it before she identified what was different. Something in the atmosphere of the entrance, the way the housekeeper who let her in moved with a more deliberate care. Inside, in the main room, there were 3 men she had not seen before, seated, older, the kind of men who carried authority in the way they occupied a chair. They looked at her with varying degrees of assessment and said nothing. Min Seok was standing near the garden doors. Junha was across the room from his father, standing with his arms at his sides, and the particular contained quality of someone managing something large in a small space. She walked into the room and stopped. Min Seok turned from the garden doors. He looked at her, and then at the 3 men, and said something in Korean that she caught only fragments of. The words for see and understand, and something she thought might have been decide. The 3 men stood and left the room without acknowledging her. The door closed. Min Seok looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his son. I made calls this morning, he said in English for her benefit, which she understood was itself a statement. About the university inquiry, about the immigration file. A pause that had weight to it. The pause of a man releasing something that cost him to hold. They will be withdrawn. The room shifted. She held herself exactly still. In return, Min Seok said, and she braced, I want nothing from you. He said it with the specific flatness of a man correcting a misapprehension before it could form. I want nothing. This is not a negotiation. He looked at his son. My son told me last night that he would leave the organization before he would allow me to use you as leverage against him. He told me that clearly and without theater. A pause. I have not heard my son refuse me clearly in 15 years. Junha said nothing. His face was the face of someone standing in the aftermath of the most significant thing they have ever said to another person and waiting to discover what it costs. I was wrong about what was weakening him, Min Seok said. He looked at Amara with the direct precision of a man who does not soften things he has concluded. I thought you were softening him, making him less. A long pause. He is not less. He stopped. He looked down briefly at the floor and then back up, and it was the only moment in everything she had witnessed of him where the age showed, not in weakness, but in the particular weight of a man arriving late at an understanding he wished he had reached sooner. I will not pretend I have no more concerns. I have concerns, but they are mine to manage. She looked at him. She said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me." Not harsh, just precise. I didn't do it for you. I did it because my son showed me who he is, and I chose to respect that. He looked at Junha once more, and in the look there was something ancient and complicated and entirely private. Then he turned toward the garden doors, signaling the end. Junha will see you out. In the entrance hall, Junha walked beside her to the gate, and they stepped through it onto the narrow road, and the cold of the outside air arrived with the particular sensation of reality reasserting itself. She stood in it for a moment. "He called the university," she said. "This morning. And immigration. It's withdrawn." "Yes," she breathed out. The breath turned white and dispersed. She looked at the tree line above the walls of the neighboring houses and the sky above the trees, and she felt something unlock in her chest that had been locked for so long she had stopped registering the pressure of it. "You told him you'd leave," she said. "Yes." "The organization, 15 years." "Yes." She turned and looked at him. "Why?" He met her eyes. The answer was right there in his face, not hidden, not managed, the most unguarded she had ever seen him in all the weeks since a frozen sidewalk and a thin jacket and a battered canvas bag. But he didn't say it. Instead, what he said was, "Because some things matter more." She looked at him for a long moment. The distance between them was small, a few feet of winter air, and she was acutely aware of it as a physical measurement, the particular charge of a small distance that has been maintained carefully for a long time and is now asking to be closed. She said his name. Just that. Just his name. And the composure he had maintained through 2 conversations with his father and 15 years of discipline and every moment of the past weeks when he had been standing close enough to reach her and had chosen not to. All of that finally and completely ran out, and he reached for her at the same moment she closed the distance, and when his arms came around her, she felt the full weight of him exhale, not in weakness, but in the specific way a person exhales when they have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and have finally been permitted to set it down. They stood in the cold on the narrow road in Seongbuk-dong for a long time. When she finally pulled back enough to look at him, his face was close, and she could see the exhaustion in it clearly now, the real exhaustion underneath the precision and the control, and she thought, "I have been seeing this for weeks and pretending I wasn't." "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Yes. Your world is not simple." "No. And there are people who are not going to accept this." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I know all of that." "Then why?" "Amara." He said her name the way he always said it, without performance, direct and clear. "I have spent 15 years making my world into something I could control completely. And it has been," he paused, choosing the exact word, "sufficient. It has been sufficient, nothing more." His hands were on her arms, and she could feel the warmth of them through her blazer. "You are the first thing in 15 years that has not been sufficient. That has been more than I planned for." A beat, something raw moving through his voice. "I don't know what to do with that, except not lose it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Then don't." and the city below them continued in its indifferent noise and cold and light, unaware that on a narrow road above it, two people had just made the most dangerous kind of decision, the kind that cannot be unmade, the kind whose consequences were about to arrive from a direction neither of them was fully prepared for, because Minseok had made his calls and withdrawn his files. But Minseok was not the only one who had been watching, and the organization that Junha ran was not held together only by the authority of one man, and there were others inside it, others who had their own calculations, their own loyalties, their own ideas about what the most feared man in Seoul was permitted to want, and one of them had already made a call of his own, to people who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this kind of opening, this specific crack in the armor of a man who had never before allowed himself to need anything he could lose. The call came at 2 in the morning, not to Junha's phone, to the emergency line that ran through his head of security, a man named Ryu Tae-sung, who had been with the organization for 11 years and who only used that line when the situation had moved past the category of problem and into the category of crisis. Junha was awake when it came. He had been awake for most of the night, not from anxiety exactly, but from the particular alertness of a man who has made an irreversible decision and is listening to the silence around it, waiting to hear what the silence contains. He picked up on the first ring. Tae-sung's voice was flat and fast. "We have a situation. The Mercer Mapo. Someone got inside. Night staff is locked in the back office. They're asking for you." Junha was already moving. "Amara Bell." "She's not there. She doesn't work nights." He was pulling on his jacket with the phone between his shoulder and jaw. "Who is it?" "Cho's people." A pause that contained its own weight. Chode-won. He stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then he continued moving faster. Chode-won was not a name that required explanation inside Junha's world. He was 63 years old, operated out of the eastern districts, and had been a structural partner in the organization's early expansion, the kind of partner whose contribution to the foundation meant he believed, with the particular conviction of someone who had never been corrected, that he held a permanent claim on the organization's direction. He had tolerated Junha's leadership for years because Junha's leadership had been profitable, and because Junha had never done anything that gave Cho reason to activate the leverage he had quietly been accumulating. A foreign woman with no connections and no power, installed in a hotel by the organization's leader without explanation, following a very public intervention on her behalf that had restructured the social order of the entire property. That was reason enough. But the call from Minseok withdrawing the files, the word of which had moved through the organization's information channels with the speed such things always move, that was the specific signal Cho had been waiting for, not the woman herself. The fact that Junha had chosen her over his father's directive, the fact that there was now something he could lose. The car covered the distance to Mapo in 14 minutes. Junha sat in the back with Tae-sung and 2 others, and the silence in the car was the silence of men who have done this before and know what they are going into and have made their peace with that. He called Amara on the way. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the specific texture of someone pulled from the edge of sleep. "What? Are you at your apartment?" A beat. The sharpening of attention that happens in an instant when tone communicates what words haven't yet. "Yes. What's happening?" "Stay there. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or someone I've sent. Do you understand?" "Junha, do you understand?" A silence. Then, quietly, with the steadiness he had come to recognize as her specific form of courage, "Yes." He ended the call. The Mercer Mapo at 2:30 in the morning was lit from within and dark from the street, the lobby visible through the glass frontage with the particular wrongness of a space that is occupied incorrectly. Too many figures moving through it, too deliberately, with the choreography of men who have come to send a message rather than conduct business. Junha counted 4 of Cho's people in the lobby. There would be more he couldn't see. He went through the front entrance. The night manager and the 2 staff members who had been on duty were in the back office, as Tae-sung had said, not harmed, but contained, the door held by one of Cho's men who stepped aside when Junha came through without making it a choice. The lobby opened up around him, cold and overlit, the art on the walls suddenly absurd in the context of the four men who had arranged themselves throughout the space with the specific placement of people who have been told where to stand. Cho Dae-won was at the bar. He was a large man, built thick through the shoulders, with the particular physical presence of someone whose size had been an instrument of authority for so long it had become indistinguishable from his personality. He was sitting on a bar stool with a glass of something in front of him that he had clearly poured himself from the hotel's stock, and he looked at Junha coming through the lobby with the expression of a man who has been waiting and is not displeased by what he sees. "You came fast," Cho said, in Korean. Junha stopped 10 feet away. He did not look at the men arranged around the room. He kept his eyes on Cho. "Get your people out of my hotel." Cho looked around the lobby with the unhurried appreciation of someone surveying a property they have decided to evaluate. "Nice place. I've always thought so." He picked up his glass. "Sit down, Junha." "I'll stand." "You'll sit," Cho said, and the pleasantness in his voice developed a specific edge, the edge of a man indicating that the register of the conversation has just changed. "We need to talk about what's been happening, about the direction you've been taking things." Junha pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat in it with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who is choosing to sit rather than being instructed to, and the distinction mattered, and both of them knew it. "Talk," he said. Cho set down his glass. "Your father contacted the university this morning, pulled the immigration file on the foreign woman. He said it the way he said everything, without particular heat, which was somehow colder than heat. The people who processed those original documents, who ran the initial surveillance on her, they work for me. Did you know that?" "I suspected it." "So you understand that when your father withdrew the file, I was informed. And when I was informed, I needed to think carefully about what that withdrawal meant." He leaned forward slightly on the stool, his elbows on the bar. "It meant that you have convinced your father to protect her, which means you have influence over the old man that you haven't had in years, which means the situation is more serious than a personal attachment." He paused. "Which means she is leverage." "She's not leverage," Junha said. "She's a person." Cho smiled. It was the specific smile of a man who has heard something he finds almost charming in its naivety. "Junha, in 30 years of working in this structure, I have never once seen a person who is not also leverage. That is the business. You know this. What do you want, Cho?" "I want the hotel and 3 other properties in the Mapo portfolio." He said it simply, with the simplicity of a man naming a price he considers fair. "And I want the woman gone from Korea within the week. Not because I care about her personally, I don't, but because her presence here represents a judgment you made that cost you your clarity, and I can't work with a partner who doesn't have clarity." The room was absolutely still. Junha sat in the chair with his hands on his knees, and he looked at Cho Dae-won, and he felt, with the complete precision of a man who has run to the end of a very long rope, that he had arrived at the place where the last of his options had resolved themselves into a single point. "No," he said. Cho's expression didn't change. "That's not how this works." "It is now." Junha stood, not fast, not aggressive, simply deliberate, with the quality of a man rising because he has finished sitting. "You don't own these properties, Cho. You contributed capital to their construction 11 years ago, and you have received returns that have exceeded that contribution by a factor of 4. The arrangement is complete. You have no claim." "I have documentation," Cho said, and the pleasantness was gone now, fully, replaced by something flat and specific. "On the organization's operations. 11 years of documentation accumulated carefully." He let that sit for a moment. The kind that becomes very interesting to certain government agencies if it reaches them. "Then it reaches them," Junha said. Cho stared at him. "File it," Junha said. "File everything you have, and then watch what happens when my legal team and the 3 district prosecutors I have long-standing relationships with begin examining what your documentation reveals about your own operations over the same 11 years. You have more exposure than I do, Cho. You've always had more exposure. That's why you've always preferred to work from behind." Cho's jaw tightened. It was the first thing that had moved in his face since the pleasantness left it. Junha picked up his phone from his jacket pocket. "Tae-sung." He didn't raise his voice. Remove Mr. Cho's people from the property. He looked at Cho. All of them. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no violence, no escalation, no theater. Taesung and the men he had brought moved through the hotel with the efficient economy of people who have done this before and understand that the objective is the outcome and not the performance. Cho's people left because the mathematics of the room had shifted past the point where staying served any purpose, and men who work for operators like Cho are, at their core, practical mathematicians. Cho sat at the bar until the room had emptied around him. Then he stood, slowly, with the specific heaviness of a man who has put down a card he believed was his strongest and watched it not perform. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Junha. "You've changed," he said. Not as an accusation, almost as an assessment. "Yes," Junha said, "it won't hold. The organization, Junha said, will adapt. Or it won't. Either way, I'm done running it the way it's been run." Cho looked at him for a long moment with the eyes of a man processing something that has arrived outside his expected parameters. Then he walked out of the hotel without another word, and the lobby settled into silence behind him. Junha stood in the silence of the lobby for a moment. His heart rate was elevated. He noted this with the precision of someone taking inventory. His hands were steady, his breathing was controlled. The adrenaline was there, and he let it run its course without chasing it or suppressing it. He called Amara. She picked up immediately, which meant she had been waiting with the phone in her hand. "Is it over?" she said. "For tonight." A pause. "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked around the lobby. The disturbed chairs, the glass Cho had left at the bar, the ordinary space of the hotel reasserting itself as an ordinary space. "I need to come and see you." "I know," she said. "Come." He got to her apartment at 4 a.m. She opened the door before he knocked, having heard the footsteps in the corridor, and she looked at him with the particular completeness of someone who has been cataloging possibilities for 2 hours and is now conducting a rapid assessment against the reality in front of them. She looked at his face, his hands, his posture. She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small and lit by a single lamp, and it smelled like the coffee she had clearly made and not drunk, the mug sitting on the small table gone cold. She had been sitting on the bed with her notes open around her, her textbooks, the ongoing evidence of the life she had been maintaining through everything, and the sight of it, the specific sight of her study materials arranged on her narrow bed in a semi-basement apartment in the middle of the night while his world had been doing what it had been doing, produced something in his chest that was too large for the space it was trying to occupy. He sat in the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap and looked at him and waited. He told her what had happened. All of it, in the precise and unembellished way he reported things, without softening the edges. Cho's name, the threat, the documentation, the properties, the outcome. She listened without interrupting, her face doing the particular thing it did when she was processing, very still, very present, her eyes moving slightly as she absorbed and organized what she heard. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The documentation he has," she said. "About the organization? Is it going to be a problem?" "It's a problem I can manage." "That's not the same as no." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She nodded slowly. She looked down at her hands and then back up at him. "What happens to Cho now?" "He's lost the leverage he was holding. Without it, his position inside the structure is significantly weakened. He'll either consolidate what he has and operate independently, or he'll try to rebuild the leverage through other means." A pause. "I'll be watching." "And the organization?" He breathed. "The organization needs restructuring. Things I should have addressed years ago. Arrangements that were convenient and that I allowed to persist because disrupting them would have cost time and political capital I didn't want to spend." He paused. "I've been managing the organization my father built, not building something of my own." She looked at him steadily. "Is that what you want to do? Build something of your own?" "I don't know exactly what it looks like yet." He held her gaze. "But yes." She was quiet again. Outside, the city was doing the thing it did before dawn. The particular suspended quality of a place catching its breath before the weight of the day begins again. A truck moved along the street at ground level, and its passage trembled briefly through the window. Then Amara said, "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." "When this is over, the inquiry, the debt, all of it, I don't want to stay inside your operation." She said it looking directly at him, without apology. "Not the hotel, not anything connected. I need to finish my degree on my own terms and build what I came here to build without it being inside something you own. A beat. That has nothing to do with what's between us. I need you to understand that." "I understand that," he said, and he did, completely, with the specific comprehension of someone who has spent enough time in her presence to understand that her independence was not a rejection, but a definition. The thing she had been defending since before he met her, not against him specifically, but against the general tendency of circumstances to subsume a person who is not vigilant about their own edges. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm just not going to be inside your structure." "Good," he said. She looked at him. "Good? I don't want you inside my structure. I want you outside it, building your own. The debt is cleared. Consider it cleared." He held up a hand before she could respond. "Not as a gift, as a correction. You've worked 3 weeks at the hotel, and the value of that work, compensated fairly, eliminates the remaining balance. I had Sung Il run the numbers yesterday." He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded document on the table beside her cold coffee. "It's in writing." She looked at the document. She didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at it for a long moment with an expression that moved through several registers too quickly to name, before settling into something that was very quiet and very tired and absolutely genuine. She picked it up and unfolded it and read it. Her jaw worked once, tightly, and then she smoothed it back out and set it down. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me." "I'm going to," she said. "You don't get to tell me not to." He almost smiled. It arrived and departed very quickly, but she saw it, and he saw that she saw it, and neither of them said anything about it. She leaned back against the wall behind her bed and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and he watched her decompress. Watched the long weeks of tension and vigilance and managed fear move through her and begin to release, the way ice doesn't melt all at once but starts at the edges. It was the most unguarded he had ever seen her. "I need to sleep," she said to the ceiling. "I know." "And you need to sleep." "Eventually." She lowered her gaze from the ceiling and looked at him. "Are you going to be okay? With all of it? Cho, your father, the restructuring?" He considered the question honestly. "It's going to be a difficult period. There are relationships inside the organization that will need to be renegotiated. Some of them won't survive renegotiation. There will be a period of instability before it settles." He paused. "But I've been operating inside someone else's architecture for 15 years. The instability of building my own seems preferable to the stability of continuing in a structure that was never actually mine." She watched him as he said this. Her eyes were serious and tired and very clear. "You've been thinking about this for a while, not just because of me. No, not just because of you." He held her gaze. "But you made it impossible to keep not deciding." She held his gaze for a long moment, then quietly, "I didn't mean to do that." "I know." A beat. "I'm not sorry you did." The lamp in the corner cast its particular warmth across the small apartment, across her study materials and her second-hand chair, and the rectangle of window that showed the dark below-ground slot of the exterior wall. And it occurred to him, sitting in her apartment at 4 in the morning after one of the most consequential nights of his adult life, that he had spent 15 years in rooms that were considerably more expensive than this one, and that none of them had felt like anything in particular, and that this one felt in the specific way of something functioning correctly, like a place where he could breathe. He didn't say this. He filed it in the place where he kept things that were true and that didn't require naming. He left before 5 because she needed to sleep without him there, making sleep complicated, and because he had calls to make as soon as the city woke up. At her door he paused and she leaned against the doorframe, and they looked at each other in the corridor light with the complete and uncomplicated honesty of two people who have been through enough together to have run out of performances. "Call me when you wake up," he said. "You call me," she said. "You'll be up first." He went down the corridor and up the stairs and out into the early morning air of Seoul, which was cold and gray and beginning, very tentatively, to lighten. The weeks that followed were not a resolution so much as a reconstruction, which is harder and slower and less satisfying than resolution, but is the only process that produces something real. Junha moved through the restructuring of his organization with the systematic patience of a man who has finally decided what he is building and why, which is a different quality of patience than the patience required to maintain something that was never exactly yours. Cho Dae-won pulled back into his Eastern District operations and did not move against the Mapo portfolio, which Junha's legal team had quietly and comprehensively ring-fenced in the weeks following the confrontation. The documentation Cho held remained where it was, a weapon too costly to fire because the recoil would destroy the man holding it. They both understood this. It was enough. The university inquiry closed in Amar's favor 6 days after Min Seok withdrew the external information that had triggered it. The compliance officer sent her a letter in the same institutional language in which he had delivered the original inquiry, informing her that the matter had been reviewed and resolved and that her enrollment status remained intact. She read it standing at the kitchen counter in her apartment and then set it down next to her coffee and stood there for a moment with her hand flat on the paper. She called her mother that evening. It was morning where her mother was, and the call reached her in the kitchen before the day had started. And Amara talked to her for 40 minutes about the scholarship and the degree and the plan, and her mother's voice carried the particular frequency of someone who has been holding their breath from 3,000 miles away and is now, carefully, beginning to let it out. She did not tell her mother everything. She told her the true things and left the rest for another time, because some things require a conversation that can be had in person, and this one was not ready yet. She went back to the hotel twice, not to work, but to settle accounts in the way she conducted all her accounts, which was directly and in person. The first time she found Eun-jung in her office and thanked her for running the floor during the period of disruption, which Eun-jung received with her characteristic precision, neither dismissing it nor dramatizing it, simply nodding and saying that the hotel had operated correctly and that was what mattered. The second time she found Ji-ho at the front desk, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who has been witness to an unprecedented series of events and has many questions and is trying to determine which one is least likely to be deflected. He said, "Are you coming back?" "No," she said. He absorbed this. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said, and meant it. He nodded, clearly still generating questions, and then said, "He's different, you know, since all of it. The people here can feel it." "Different how?" Ji-ho thought about this with more seriousness than she expected. "Like he's decided something. People who've decided something are different to work for than people who are still deciding. Less," he searched for the word, "less weather, less like you never know what it's going to be." She looked at him. "That's more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Ji-ho." He looked pleased and tried not to show it. "I'm very perceptive," he said. "I've been saying this." She left the hotel for the last time and walked down the street toward the subway station with her bag on her shoulder in the cold of the early spring air. It was March now, the worst of the winter past. The temperature still sharp but containing, beneath the sharpness, the first tentative suggestion of something that wasn't just cold. And she walked with the particular quality of a person moving through a city they have decided is theirs, not given to them, not contingent on anyone's permission, but claimed through the simple and costly act of remaining. The meeting between Junha and his father happened in the third week of March, at the house in Seongbuk-dong, without Amara. She had not been asked to attend, and she would not have attended if she had been. It was a conversation between a father and a son, and it did not belong to her. Junha told her about it afterward on a Saturday afternoon, sitting in a small restaurant in Mapo that she had found 3 months ago and had never brought anyone to. He told her that he and his father had talked for 2 hours and that the conversation had covered 15 years of accrued silence. Not comfortably, not with the full resolution that exists only in stories where people are allowed to say the perfect thing at the perfect moment, but with the particular honesty that arrives when two people have finally run out of the energy required to maintain their positions. His father had told him, at the end of it, that he was not going to pretend to understand the choices his son was making, but that he had watched his son, in the confrontation with Cho and in the weeks following, operate with a clarity and decisiveness that he had not seen from him in years, and that whatever had produced that clarity, he was not prepared to name it a weakness. It was, Junha said, the closest thing to an apology his father was constitutionally capable of. She listened to this and nodded and reached across the small table and put her hand over his for a moment. Not long, just a moment, the duration of a breath, and then took it back. "Is it enough?" she asked. "Between you and him." He thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "It's a start," he said. "We'll see what we build from it." She nodded. Outside the restaurant window, Mappo went about its Saturday afternoon business. People with bags of groceries, a child on a bicycle with training wheels, a couple stopped at the corner consulting their phones. The ordinary human traffic of an ordinary neighborhood in an ordinary city that had been, for both of them, over the past months, the location of the least ordinary thing that had happened to them. "I got my thesis approval this week," she said. He looked at her. "Tell me." "International labor policy in East Asian markets. I've been wanting to write it for a year and a half and couldn't find an angle that felt honest." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I found it." "What's the angle?" "The gap between policy as written and policy as enforced. What falls into that gap? Who falls into that gap?" A pause. "It's not an abstract question, for me." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that she had learned to read over the months. The specific quality of attention that was not the professional assessment he turned on everything else, but was something that existed only in the particular register of her, a register she was slowly, carefully learning to receive without deflecting. "How long?" 18 months to completion, if I stay on pace." "You'll stay on pace." "I know," she said. "I'm just saying 18 months." "I know what you're saying." She looked at him across the small table in the small restaurant in the neighborhood where his hotel stood and where, 4 months ago, she had collapsed in the snow outside the pedestrian overpass, and she felt the full length of the distance between that moment and this one as a physical thing, a weight that was also a proof. Proof that distance is possible, that things can change entirely while you are still the same person, that the same hands that were too cold to grip the concrete pillar can now be wrapped around a coffee cup in a warm room, across from a man who had pulled her out of the snow and had not, despite every calculation that should have pushed him toward it, been able to leave her there. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "That night, when you found me, you didn't have to stop." "No." "Most people wouldn't have." "No," he said again. "They wouldn't have." She looked at him. "Why did you?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a tram moved along the street with its particular sound, the grind and hum of a large thing navigating fixed tracks. He looked at her with the unhurried honesty of a man who has nothing left to manage and said, "I don't know. I looked at you and I couldn't keep walking. That's the only answer I have." She held his gaze. "That's enough," she said. "That's actually enough." The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle particular to early spring, the angle where the sun is low enough to reach horizontal surfaces, and warm them briefly before withdrawing, and it caught the side of his face and made him look, for a moment, like someone she was seeing for the first time, which was also, she thought, a way of seeing someone you have finally stopped being afraid to look at directly. She finished her coffee. He finished his. They split the bill because she had insisted on this from the beginning, and he had learned when insisting back served any purpose, which was never. They put on their coats. They walked out of the restaurant into the March afternoon of a city that was, very slowly and with no particular ceremony, beginning to warm. They walked without particular destination. The way people walk when walking is the point rather than the transit, and the city moved around them. Its noise and its cold and its particular mix of the ancient and the brutally new. And they talked about her thesis and his restructuring and a book she was reading and a property decision he was considering. The ordinary conversation of two people who have survived something together and have discovered, on the other side of it, that they also simply like each other, which is the thing that outlasts everything else when the crisis has burned away, and what remains is just two people in an ordinary afternoon deciding what to do with it. The streets in Mapo were still carrying the last of the winter grit along their edges, the gray residue of a season that had been long and had asked a great deal of everyone who had moved through it. The trees along the riverside path were beginning, very quietly, to consider the possibility of leaves. Not yet, but the possibility. She was 2 semesters from her degree. He was 3 months into rebuilding something that was actually his. They were walking in the same direction, which was the most they had promised each other, and for now was everything. The city went on around them, indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware that it had been, this past winter, the location of a rescue that had not been only about a woman in the snow, but about a man who had been frozen longer and had not known it until something small and stubborn and alive refused to disappear into the cold on his behalf. He had built an empire to protect himself from needing anything. She had crossed the world to build something of her own with nothing but will and the refusal to be diminished. They had collided in the dark on a frozen sidewalk, and neither of them had been the same since. And that was not a comfortable story or a clean one, but it was the one they had, and they were, each in their own way, the kind of person who does not set down what is real simply because it is difficult to carry. The afternoon held them, briefly, in its thin March light. Then they turned a corner and continued, and the city received them, as cities do, without ceremony, without judgment, simply open and ongoing and entirely prepared to be whatever came next.